Yeah. What's going on in Minnesota, Matt?
So, Jeff Bezos' Washington Post issued one of my favorite corrections of the year today. We'll get to that later, but to start with the headline here. Largest private sector nurses strike in U.S. history begins in Minnesota. The quote from one nurse: "I can't give my patients the care they deserve." About 15,000 nurses in Minnesota walked off the job Monday to protest understaffing and overwork, marking the largest strike of private sector nurses in U.S. history. Slated to last 3 days, the strike spotlights nationwide nursing shortages exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic that often result in patients not receiving adequate care. Tensions remain high between nurses and healthcare administrators across the country, and there are signs that work stoppages could spread to other states. Minnesota nurses charged that some units could do go without a lead nurse on duty, and that nurses fresh out of school are delegated assignments typically held by more experienced nurses across some I can't speak across some 16 hospitals where strikes are expected. And we all know this is true. And keep in mind that these facts are what is being put on the public record and how they are not refuted. The nurses are demanding a role in staffing plans, changes to shifts, scheduling practices, and higher wages. "I can't give my patients the care they deserve," says Chris Rubesh, the vice president of Minnesota Nurses Association and a nurse at Essentia Health in Duluth. "Call lights go unanswered. Patients should only be waiting for a few seconds or minutes if they soiled themselves or their oxygen came unplugged or they need to go to the bathroom. But that can take 10 minutes or more. Those are things that can't wait." I mean, can you imagine? And one of the other nurses says, like, if it was my person in the hospital, I wouldn't leave their side.
Hmm.
Because, and we have the wonders of technology. You have a nurse call switch right at your bed. You're in discomfort. Uh, you need assistance. Your oxygen came loose. You hit a button. A nurse is supposed to be right there. That's what we need, and we do not have that right now. The Minnesota Nurses Association, the nurses union, said hospital administrators have continued to refuse solutions on understaffing and safety in contract negotiations. It said nurses have increasingly been asked to take on more patients for bedside care to make up for labor shortages, exacerbating burnout and high turnover. Some hospitals have offered increased safety protocols, blah, 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 but have not budged on other safety and staffing related demands. The union has proposed new mechanisms for nurses to have stronger say in how the wards are staffed, including a committee made up of nurses and management at each hospital. I mean, I think that's fairly generous. You can include some managers there. I would frankly maybe include some doctors, but I don't know. Like, I don't know if these business degreed folks are the ones we need in charge of
Yeah.
healthcare. And I think
Or politician.
fundamentally, exactly. That's where we need to. That's where we need to go. It has also proposed protections against retaliation for nurses who report understaffing. I mean, that should go without saying. Striking nurses at some hospitals said their shifts are often short 5 to 10 nurses, forcing nurses to take on more patients than they can handle. For years, hospitals in the United States have faced understaffing problems. A surge in demand and increased safety risks for nurses during the pandemic accelerated those trends. The number of healthcare workers in the United States has still not recovered to its pre pandemic levels, down 37,000 workers compared to February 2020. At the same time, demand for healthcare services has steadily increased during the pandemic, with the backlog of people who delayed care now seeking medical attention. And you will notice this: the management company will say, well, we lost all this money during the pandemic. Well, it's like, that's a problem for a business. But
Hmm.
that's no reason to plan for the future and attack these labor rights of Minnesota nurses. We're going to get to why Minnesota is actually very good for nurses typically and why that's under attack right now.
No, I mean,
Obviously.
especially for something that's
Yeah,
so socially necessary like this, too.
right. Um, uh, and let's see, I think I got one more. Oh, yeah, here's the correction. The correction right at the top of the story. A previous version of the story incorrectly stated that there was no indication that the work stoppages would spread to other states. However, unions for nurses in at least 2 other states have also authorized strikes over the past month. The article has been corrected. Here's the correcting paragraph. There are some signs that nurse and other healthcare worker strikes could spill over to other states in the coming weeks. 4,000 nurses with the Michigan Nurses Association voted earlier this month to authorize a strike related to understaffing concerns, and 7,000 healthcare workers in Oregon have also authorized a work stoppage. University of Wisconsin nurses narrowly averted strike this week. Therapists and clinicians in Hawaii and California are currently in the fourth week of what has become the longest running mental health care strike over inadequate staffing levels. That mental health care strike is not that's not something that's foreign to what is it, Alina Health, which is the one which runs one of the hospitals being struck by the nurses, was also recently struck by mental health professionals. 400 workers at Alina Health and M Health Fairview were prepared to strike again. Said they were prepared to strike again earlier this month. The first time they struck was in May. That was after decided to form a union in 2021, and the same management company not honoring negotiations. So this is a broad problem, shall we say, and this is a problem again with running hospitals like a business. Continue here. I want to put this into context here. Minneapolis is actually fairly good for as far as wages go, and you're there. This is being used against these workers in
Classic.
negotiations, right? We all know that inflation has gone up and uh, wage increases haven't been forthcoming, and so these nurses are now working or have been working without a contract, and they want a wage increase to continue this position that they have in on top of the safety stuff, and that should absolutely be doable. When you consider another aspect, which is how this management company is compensating for the striking workers, which is to bring in travel nurses. And here's a report from WCCO from Minnesota on this, and I just want to play a little bit of this here.
And then one up the block just outside Children's, Minnesota. Now, these nurses, as we've mentioned, are out here as traveling nurses are inside trying to fill the void. In fact, this morning we saw about 8 buses filled with traveling nurses pull into Abbott as the strike nurses were setting up outside. That was at about 6:30 this morning. The strike nurses say their traveling counterparts just cannot provide the same quality of care as they can.
They don't know our policies, our protocols. They don't know where stuff is. How does our unit work? How do our patients work? And that you can't learn that in a couple days of training, and that's an issue for us.
Now, just to put into perspective some of the costs to the hospitals during this strike, the strike nurses shared some job postings circulating among the nurses. The advertisements for those traveling nurses specifically for this strike here. Now, on the low end, some are about $8,000 for the 3 days of the strike, plus the 2 days over the weekend for training. And on the high end, it's about $13,000. So at bare minimum, some of these traveling nurses are making just under $1,600 a day. Strike nurses have asked for about a 30% wage increase over the course of 3 years.
So that's what the management company is doing. So you have these nurses, and the management comes to them with their business degrees and says, actually, you're making more than Chicago, so we're going to need to cut that. We need to cut you down to size. And if you don't accept that, we're going to fly nurses out here and pay them like they're on the Minnesota Timberwolves at the end of the bench. $8,000 a week on the low end. That's about $400,000 a year. And that's an expense that they're willing to pay to maintain control over these workers and to cut them down to size. And those wages and that safety will need to be fought for, because that's the way we do society. Things like healthcare in this country, we have to negotiate with a business degree person. Oh, you're muted, David.
It's very telling too, just how fearful bosses are of any kind of labor say in these things, regardless if it's healthcare or Starbucks or anywhere. Like, they will take losses. They will pay other people more, as long as they have like a more compliant and expendable workforce, because they very much fear any kind of democratic power sharing when it comes to management of these institutions. And in this case, it's one of those where it's absolutely absurd, as you've been alluding to, where you have people who understand the human body, the human needs, the standard of care for people versus folks who went to a 4-year degree business school trying to find ways to make the number go up on their spreadsheet, right? It's like it's absolutely um, ridiculous to sit here and act like the administrators have any better conception of how to care for people who are sick and need help.
Of course not. And this is the other point that I think is a real tell, especially if you're like a nurse and is wondering and maybe like unsure which way. It's very telling that the management never says, no, that's not true about the safety stuff. Everything's fine with regards to like if you know somebody, a loved one is receiving care in the hospital, that's all fine. What they're saying is the nurses union it's illegal that they're on strike. They should appeal to mediation, and so they chose to strike,
Yeah.
right? So they're not even denying the unsafe conditions. They're simply like trying to pull like a fairly crude well, if you strike, well, it's your fault, guys. Like that's as sophisticated as the response is here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, best of luck and solidarity with all the people there on strike. And it's horrible that has to come to this because, it does mean for patients like a lower um, quality of care. And that's on the business owners who are forcing people into the situation where they have to fight, for their basic kind of human rights and dignity here to make sure that
Yeah.
they're safe and the patients are safe in the long term. All of the punishment, all of the things that are going to be difficult for patients in the next, few days it's on the business folks. It's as clear as that.
Yeah, and I mean, I just can't get over the saying like, "Oh, we got to tighten our belts because of the pandemic." No, we have to expand because healthcare is a necessity, and
Yeah.
you're not doing it fucking safely with your fucking business degree. So get
And
the fuck out of here.
and it just again it shows like from what we're seeing in Minneapolis to what we've seen with like rural hospitals across the country. We have just been seeing time and time again how the free market system, it's bad in most cases, but in this one especially, is just incapable of providing quality care to people across the board. Right? If it's nurses being pushed in a situation where they have to go and strike in Minneapolis, or if it's all these rural hospitals closing across the country because the hospitals can't make enough money to get by and hire those super smart business consultants to run it for them.
Yeah.
There's just no better argument than capitalist healthcare and practice as to why we need socialized medicine in this country.